Greetings, everyone. My guest today is Rudhir Krishtel, a speaker, coach, and former AmLaw partner who works with lawyers and legal leaders on leadership, difficult conversations, ethical decision making, and building healthier, more effective legal organizations. With experience spanning both law firm leadership and the corporate world, Rudhir brings a unique perspective on what it means to lead with integrity in today's legal profession. I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast. So welcome, Rudhir. It's so nice to have you here with me.
Thank you, Courtney. It's great being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. So I want to begin with this word ethics. And I think that when people hear the word ethics, what first comes to mind is rules or regulations. So I'm curious, how do you define ethics in the day-to-day practice of law?
I think about it, it's a great question. And I think about it along the lines of in challenging moments, we've entered a very challenging practice. We've volunteered or we've stepped into very challenging situations and just making sure that in these challenging situations, we have a compass on what's right and wrong, that we feel like we do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds simple, but much harder to do in practice because again, we throw ourselves into the tough spots.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that you mentioned internal compass is so important because what we're sort of fed externally can make us question or maybe feel a bit disconnected from the internal compass. I know offline before we started recording and we discussed what it was we were going to speak about, you mentioned that many ethics conversations focus on what someone did wrong after the fact. So I'm curious to explore what interests you more about the moments before a decision is made.
Yeah, well, I just want to level set. There's these agreed upon, possibly agreed upon rules in society, the right way to do things. And I like sports analogies, and so there's a lot of, even at the time of this podcast, there's just a lot happening in the sports world. There's a lot of matches, a lot of games that people are watching, and you can watch people in a finals match where all eyes are on somebody, and you can see someone in basketball attempt a layup when they should have dunked it. It's like you're watching this match and everybody's all eyes are on in on something and they're just so close to the basket. And it's like, what were they thinking? Like, why didn't they just dunk it? And it really is like, what's going on for that person inside? They're a trained professional. They've been practicing for years, if not decades. They've thought about this moment their entire life. And I think lawyers do that. I think we go through a rigorous amount of training, a long arc of thoughtfulness. And even as a mid-level associate, I remember watching some partners in a room just being like, is that what we're deciding? Like, it's very, and if you're a lawyer and you haven't been through that situation, well, you just haven't practiced law. Like, we're always oftentimes in a room where you're just really wondering, like, how do we get here? And I think it's because it's challenging and it's very like we're putting ourselves in complex situations. You mentioned I was a partner at a firm, I was in corporate law, high stakes, very public facing, complex decisions, high stress. And oftentimes, what can happen is that because of the pressure of the moment, you can lose sight of yourself in
Yeah.
part. And so you mentioned it, if you go to a CLE training, oftentimes it's, don't mess up. Here's the consequences for messing up. By the way, in the last 6 months, here's a bunch of people that messed up. Here's what they should have done. Here's what they didn't do. And I think the reality is that the same individual on a different day would make different decisions. You take one person, if they're having a bad day or a bad moment in life or a really bad quarter and a lot is happening, they could make a different decision than in a good moment, in a
Yeah.
thoughtful moment. And so when I'm talking to folks, oftentimes the conversation is really about, hey, what's going on the inside? What's happening that informs this decision? And I find that if we're in a bad place or a good place, just that one flip can impact how we communicate with people, what we choose to share, ultimately what we decide, and then even how we handle it after the fact. And a lot of that can shift just based on really what's happening for us.
Yeah, there's so many things you just mentioned that really resonate with me. First, the basketball analogy. I have three sons and a husband, and including myself, who are huge basketball fans. We're from Philadelphia area, so of course we support the Sixers. I tend to be a little bit more compassionate and not as hard on the players when I see them make a mistake. My maybe it's from my training, having worked in the legal sector as a litigator where there very much is a right and a wrong. And when we make one wrong move, big or small, especially when many of us are perfectionists, we're so hard on ourselves that 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 arrow hurts, that second arrow that many of us kind of shoot at ourselves, that really hurts. And then to have it come from all these different angles, that really compounds how much it hurts. So I tend to be the more compassionate one, but I'll hear my boys screaming, what was he thinking? What an idiot. So that really hits home for me. But I also really like how you're acknowledging that not only day to day will our decisions change or whatever's coming up for us, but even breaking that down moment to moment, I think depending on what we're facing at any given moment, it really can change the way we're perceiving something and how we end up responding to it. But that, I think what you're alluding to, that space where we can give ourselves a moment, that can make all the difference in how the next moment unfolds. But it's very hard, especially when the stakes are high and we're expected to perform at rapid speeds that slowing down, I think, is really challenging.
Yeah, on the sports side, I'm went to a prolific football college, Michigan, and we had a coach last year that had some ethical issues. It was national news, it was international news. So it's a school with a global alumni. Things matter around the world, and he made ethical, you know, unethical decisions. He
Yeah.
got laid out in front of the world, and it was very hard, and he was very reactive to it. And somebody said to me, like, man, he should have just had you in his ear.
Mm.
Like he could have talked to you. He could have talked to somebody. And I think that's the key part is that oftentimes, if you have a moment to reflect, to gather, to take a beat, to share, you feel comfortable talking about what's really going on,
Yeah.
you can bring yourself back to yourself. I think what we're really talking about are these moments when we lose ourselves. And there's a good book, and I love, I think I guess it's a business book. It's called
Yeah.
The Power Paradox by Dacher Keltner. And oftentimes in business books, there's like one good page. And in the one good page in this book, uh, Dacher talks about how power, people have a tendency to become corrupt. Power corrupts. Power corrupts. And we
Yeah.
are in a practice that drives people into positions of power. When you make partner, when you make general counsel, when you hit a next level, it's a position of power. And on this one good page, Dacher sort of shows an image that says, as you move into positions of power, on your path to power, you share, you might be open, you might be collaborative, understanding, empathetic. You're building the reputation and credibility to move into a seat of power. But as soon as you get into a position of power, you want to hold on to it. And at that point, when you start to think about yourself and holding on to something, you end up exhibiting less empathy, less understanding, less collaboration, less sharing, less transparency. More often than not, in an organization, one of the widest concerns that people have is a lack of transparency. And oftentimes we try to hold on to things because it's hard. And so I think as people get into positions of power, like I mentioned, that associate watching that partner, it's like, is that what we've decided? Is that what we're doing? And yet that person in a position of power is under a lot of pressure. all eyes on them, holding on to something, trying to reflect a high level of responsibility and reasonableness,
Mhm.
and oftentimes, at times not making those calls. And then we can have all of the Monday morning quarterbacks. You can have all the Monday morning talk shows wonder, how did that lawyer make that decision? How the heck did they do that? And that's what I think these CLE trainings are often about is sort of really being clear that that decision was right or wrong. And I think that's great. But in the moment, uh, what happens that we lose our sense of self? What happens that we lose the thing that we have naturally had for years, which is wisdom and sound judgment and thoughtfulness and resourcefulness and understanding?
Yeah, I think a lot of these that you're mentioning just now are the attitudinal foundations of mindfulness that exist within each of us. But we do unfortunately get disconnected from them, some more than others, depending on how we're conditioned in the work that we do, the world that we live in. So I'd love for you to sort of, if you would, say somebody climbs the ladder, they reach that point of maybe they become partner of at their law firm, and they do have more power. They are handling higher stakes cases. They are mentoring younger associates or less experienced attorneys. Can you take us through what actually happens internally for that attorney when he or she encounters some type of ethical dilemma? How can they, A, notice what's happening, and then B, find ways to manage it so that they can reconnect with those qualities that you mentioned?
Well, I think even a first question is, what does it feel like to be in power? What does that feel like? What does it feel like when you are in that seat, when you've reached that place of authority, when you are mentoring, when you do have responsibility, when you do sign your name on the dotted line? For some of us, there's a concern to it. And for many of us, there's an energy to it.
Mhm.
It's like, it's powerful.
Yeah.
It feels great. It feels energizing. It feels like you're in control. There's a freedom to it. And so for folks that are listening, just notice, what does it feel like when you're in a position of power? Any level. I'm finally in the position of authority. We're in positions of power all over the place. Some of us are, we're parents. We have people that we ask to do things for us. We bring in someone to help us. Sometimes we feel like we're in power at Starbucks. It's like, how about my order right? It's like there's these positions of power that we get
Yeah.
into, and it's like it's got to be this way, and I'm the authority. And I just get curious about what that feels like. And before we even go on to the next thing, Courtney, what does that feel like when if we're guessing, and we've both been in positions and situations before, what is that feeling when you're in a position of power?
Yeah. I mean, I can talk from my personal
Yeah,
experience.
that's hugely valuable.
I do think, I know for myself, even to be able, when I was asked to, well, let me step back. When I came into mindfulness and was encouraged through formal practice to connect more fully with the body, it felt foreign. And I think in many respects that the nature of the work that we do as attorneys, whether you're a leader, whether you're brand spanking new, right out of the gate from law school, we are taught to be really wise thinkers. We're very much in our head strategizing, resolving, looking out for potential issues and problems and what our adversary's next move is going to be. And we are not as connected to more of an embodied sense of what's here. So I'll just speak from personal experience when I learned a body scan meditation and was asked to feel into the top of the head. I was like, I can tell you what my thoughts are, but I don't know what the sensations are. So I think for many attorneys, that more embodied presence can feel challenging. Now, getting to my personal experience, as I became a more seasoned practitioner, I was very uncomfortable in having more of a leadership position. And what I recognized a pattern. I played, getting back to, I know we're using a lot of sports analogies here, but it kind of rings true because I think what showed up for me very early on in life followed me into my profession as an attorney. I was on the varsity tennis team in high school, and I loved being competitive. I loved being a really great tennis player. I did not want to be number one singles. I was comfortable being number two or number three, but I didn't want the pressure to be the best, number one. And that sort of theme followed through into my profession as a lawyer. I wanted to be a great attorney. I wanted to handle big cases. I wanted to get great outcomes for my clients, but I didn't want to be at the cream of the crop. I didn't want to be the one that all the less experienced attorneys were coming to. It felt like a lot of pressure, and to some extent, I never felt as if I was good enough in the work that I was doing to be a leader. So, so that's what came up for me, and then through the more embodied practices, I was able to identify where that was showing up and get really curious about that, and it loosened the grip that it had on me. So that ability to, getting back to your question, what does it feel like to be able to drop beneath the story I was telling myself, that inner narrative, and to feel into the body? I was able to open myself to greater possibility, and to know that I was actually a really great leader in the legal sector, but I got in my own way in some regards. So for me, that was my experience. It took deepening my understanding of mindfulness, being able to connect with my body, and then to use mindfulness tools to explore what was coming up for me, such as what does it feel like to have power, to be in control, to be a leader.
Yeah, and you're using language and terms that when I was practicing law would have been wholly unfamiliar for me. You know, being embodied, being in my body, dropping down below the thoughts. Uh, I would have been like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
And
they
yet,
don't they don't
yeah,
teach this in law school. I mean, some law schools are now, but when I was in law school, maybe when you were in law school, this wasn't something that there was a class on.
right. And so just that alone has so much value in you and me sort of noticing and realizing that uh, this practice is so centered in on thinking and
Yeah,
thinking and the logical uh, way, getting into our body. How does that make you feel? I will ask so many people, how does that make you feel, about whatever issue is coming up, and they're not even able to answer the question. Like, I don't know what you're about. What do you mean, how does it make me feel?
yeah,
Here's how I'm going to solve it. I'm like, no, no, no. How does it make you feel? And I
yeah,
think it's a really powerful question because, what's going on in your heart? What's going on in your lungs? What's in your belly? What do you notice? And I think it's about really bringing forward into decision making our head, our hearts, our intuition, our full mind, the broader mind.
yeah,
And there's a lot of value to that. And starting to move and shift the practice, or at least support the people that are in leadership positions with that practice so that they're able to go to a much more grounded place when making decisions. And the more they practice it, again, they get more into their body. They're able to reflect a little bit more thoughtfully about the decisions in front of them because trying to memorize a logic map in a very complex situation where there may not be a rule. It's one thing to follow a rule, not follow a rule. I find that some of these more complex decisions, there's no rule in place.
yeah,
It's you're in no man's land and you got to make a call. And right afterwards, the and the reporters show up. And it might not be press and reporters, but it is, your colleagues, the general counsel, some ethics, somebody on your team that loses faith because you uh, were self-centered or not completely thoughtful when making that decision. So there's a lot at stake here, and the
yeah,
rules aren't always clear. And I think that's the hard part is what's happening for people. So going back to the feeling of power, it's energizing or it can be nervous, it can be scary. And then having power taken away, which oftentimes is the consequence that we're worried about, that if I make the wrong call, there's a whole, suite of issues and challenges that I might face. And so you're putting people in a very pressured situation oftentimes, and then they got to make a decision. And so we can certainly talk about what that's like, but there's just oftentimes a lot at stake.
Yeah. I like also how you're giving voice to the fear of making the wrong decision because, again, going back to the this feeling tone, I think it's so easy to complicate decision making and going back and forth between right and wrong. We can drive ourselves crazy, but when we can drop more fully into the body, the body won't steer us wrong. This inner compass, if we can just trust it, it actually makes some of the more challenging ethical decisions effortless. I don't want to say effortless, but there's less efforting if we can listen to what the heart is calling for or what's coming up within the body. But in many ways, I think, at least in my experience in the work that I was doing as a litigator, we're encouraged to suppress some of our emotions. So it really is challenging. I think the more and more we're not, the more and more we're out of touch with sensations, the more we go back to the thinking mind. But the mind can take us in a lot of different directions. The body's always here and now. So the more and more we can come back to it, I think the answers just come to us in many ways. So thanks for pointing that out. I was curious to know how you help with organizations who maybe not just on an individual level, but organizations who want to work with you in bringing these practices or these tools to their collective teams. Are there ways that you can support the organization as a whole with what it is you teach?
Yeah, there's a few things that we do. When you talk about organizations as a whole, there are what I find most valuable are sort of cohort programs that allow you to build trust with your team and foster more relationship amongst people in leadership or people in leadership positions. And for example, there's an organization that we work with really in their leadership team, really incredible individual contributors. And through working with this team over some time, a higher amount of trust has been built amongst these team members.
Yeah,
So more comfortable sharing, higher
yeah,
transparency,
yeah,
greater communication. Oftentimes the things that we hold close to the vest, what people are asking for is no, just share it. And what ends up happening, you know, in connection with our prior conversation is that, oftentimes in these ethical dilemmas and these challenges, we don't know who to go to. So an ethics training will say, call the ethics officer or call your general counsel.
yeah,
But you still then might have people that you don't trust, or everyone still might be stressed and challenged or in a complex place. And so fostering greater trust, greater groundedness in a community of leaders, feeling more comfortable sharing challenges earlier on can help mitigate a lot of these challenges, I think, down the road, rather than creating kind of siloed pillars of success at an organization, really kind of fostering collaboration goes a really long way. And so some of the conversations that we have with groups and teams has a lot of value. We certainly come in and we deliver workshops on these topics. We get an entire group of people together and, virtually or in person, have a meaningful dialogue in the way that we're having now about what's really happening underneath the surface. And I think that goes a really long way. And then finally, one-on-one coaching, again, working with a leader. Oftentimes, what we'll hear from managing partners or practice group leaders or, in-house leaders is it's just good to have the space. I never get time to reflect. I never take this time to process and to digest and to think. And allowing people, in collective spaces or in individual spaces to gather, think twice, reflect, hear
yeah,
back from somebody else what's really happening goes a really long way in improving people's approach, allowing people to step further into their leadership, and creating a better, feel like healthier, collaborative workplace community that drives people towards better outcomes.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple words that stuck out. Time. I think time is still limited for legal professionals, and it's really hard, I think, for an individual to build in time to their busy schedule to learn these tools, to make time to care for themselves in this way. But I try to, in the individuals that I work with in a one-on-one format, I try to really drive home the fact that by you taking this time for yourself, it's not selfish, it's not self-indulgent, that by you carrying yourself a certain way, by you being able to step out of reactivity and make more conscious choices that from an ethical standpoint, they're going to benefit everyone. That this is a gift not only to give to yourself, it's a gift to give to your collective organization. And then I really, really appreciate what you're sharing about teams, bringing in people like yourself to work together with them, because so often it's great when there's maybe a new software program that's going to make things more efficient or things more organized for the business. But these more human skills that we can learn together that can hold space for us to get vulnerable and know that we're not alone in what it is we're worrying about, or our fears from doing something that's wrong or wanting to do things that are right. When we can hear this in a safe space and feel that trust amongst our colleagues and even our bosses, the leaders, that's what makes a really successful business. And so often, this time, going back to the time element, it's how are we prioritizing our time as individuals, and how are leaders and business owners prioritizing the time to invest in their teams. So two words in particular that really stuck out for me. I know that there are people who are listening, watching, who are perhaps curious in what it is you have to share and would love to find ways where they can learn more about your work, your offerings, and more about you. Is there a good place where we can share for them to explore?
Yeah, our website, my last name, Krishtel.com, I think is just great. And folks reach out regularly. It's an intake form there that just allows you to say, hey, here's what we're looking for. Here's what we need for our team. Here's what I'm looking for. And we set up a call. We talk through it. And this is something that we do for people and for organizations every day. And so we'd love to hear from folks about challenges you have on your team, challenges you have in your growth, challenges that you face in your leadership or in your business, and what you might want better for your team or even for yourself. And I think, but all of that is where we focus. We work with leaders to think about a better practice, a better culture, better business, and all of that. I think in a more thoughtful way, which is what really people really appreciate when we work with folks.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. And I'll just share that I connected with you through LinkedIn, through actually a friend, a mutual friend of ours, and I found your post on LinkedIn to be very hopeful, very uplifting. So before we close out the episode on that note, on that sense of hope, I'm curious to hear from you when you think about the legal profession and how it is right now. What gives you hope that attorneys can continue to uphold integrity and ethical leadership, even in these really challenging times?
The conversations that I have with people daily, the positive feedback and I get on their careers, just this last week, I met with someone. We had worked together on business development as an example, and we grew his practice to a significant practice, someone who's being thought of for leadership positions, being thought of for a larger platform, and um, all what sounded like from a very sort of sound and like a healthy place. And so when I work with people, there's this conversation when we work with people about the practice is better, the team is better, and I've actually taken more meaningful breaks. And I think that's what we're looking for is that if we can move the practice towards something that allows people to value themselves for more than, their hours or their time or the strength of their wins, and a little bit more on longevity, on thoughtfulness, and on being a more collaborative and engaged leader. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of hope, and there's a lot of pressure testing on this practice and in this profession these days. And so making sure our leaders are shored up and connecting with people every day that I feel like embody and exhibit that makes me very hopeful.
Well, I'm feeling hopeful just hearing what you're sharing, and I'm very grateful to have had you on the show. So, gigantic thank you from my heart to yours. It really was wonderful to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Courtney. I really appreciate it.
And I'll make sure to include all the links in the show notes so that you can connect as you would like. And again, thanks everyone for listening. Hope that everyone has a great day.